Hello, Carolina. My name is Mike Waddell, and I am the founder and principal of Brentwood LLC. Since graduating from Guilford College back in 1991, I have had an incredible career in sports. First as a broadcaster, and later as a director of athletics and three-time pro sports team president. For the last decade, I've also been developing my own company, Brentwood. Now, looking back, the best of times have been my time spent on the mic, working where I did, with whom I did, and telling stories in a certain way, having fun doing what I love to do. And that leads me to where I am right here, right now, here with you and a few of my friends. And we're about to launch the North Carolina Sports Network. With this first piece of content, we're putting this new media venture into the field, and it's all about the Old North State, a new spin on some classic standards, all North Carolina, all the time. And to do this, I needed an ace in the hole, a throwback in some ways, a creative tour de force who has always been a fantastic storyteller, charged with passion for the facts and an unquenchable curiosity, informing you, entertaining you, and maybe from time to time, even provoking you. There was only one person who was a match for this laundry list of qualities, my man, David Glenn. He's been a sports radio talk show host, an editor, businessman, entrepreneur, popular sports TV podcast guest, longtime North Carolina-based attorney, and even a UNC Wilmington sports media professor over the last couple of years. He joins legends like Woody Durham, Bill Curry, Wally Osley, Nick Mixon as multi-time winners of the North Carolina Sportscaster of the Year Award. And that's a truly unique combination of accolades for a guy who is just entering his prime. And in my opinion, he's a lock for enshrinement one day in the North Carolina Sports Hall of Fame. That's my man, David Glenn. And right after this clap, you'll see DG on the screen for the first time in 3 years. Right now, he's a throwback in some ways, a creative tour de force who has always been a fantastic storyteller, charged with passion for the facts and an unquenchable curiosity. We're talking, of course, about the one, the only DG, David Glenn. And David, welcome back to the airwaves and to the North Carolina Sports Network.
Well, thank you, Mike, for inviting me to be a part of the North Carolina Sports Network. Thank you for helping me reboot a new and different version of the David Glenn Show. And thank you for that kind introduction as well. It's funny, I had an uncle who liked to introduce me a little bit differently. He said, my nephew David has been a member of the media since the late 1980s, and he's been an attorney since the mid-1990s. If he ever becomes a politician, he will officially become the 3 most hated people in America. So I like your introduction a lot more than I like his. And as we dive into things here, 2 quick things. Number one, thank you not only to you, Mike, but to all the folks, employers, listeners, readers, colleagues, my own employees, my producers, those who listen, those who read. Without them, I wouldn't be able to live my dream covering and getting paid to write and talk about sports for the last 35 years. So there's a lot of thanks to a lot of people in a lot of directions, now including the North Carolina Sports Network. And beyond that, I want to thank the North Carolina Port Council for helping us get underway, and thank many others that we'll be able to introduce soon. And I want to remind other folks that for us to make this thing truly soar across the state of North Carolina, we're going to need your help. So Mike will get into it more, but we need you to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We need you to subscribe to the DG Show podcasts. We need you to invite us to speaking engagements and buy our T-shirts and sweatshirts. Maybe become a show sponsor if you have your own company or know somebody who does. We need partners, and we hope y'all support us in that regard, whether it's with your eyes, your ears, or with your dollars as a sponsor, because we can't make this next dream happen without the same kind of support and loyalty that Mike and I have had in different ways over these last 3 decades.
Well, I tell you one thing, I love music, and I know, DG, you like music too, and to quote a Kelly Clarkson song, since you've been gone, there has been a lot of stuff go down around the state of North Carolina, just in general life and in the world of sports. I got to ask you, what have you been up to the last 30 months since you left the airwaves in the Triangle?
Well, there's a personal part to that answer and a professional part of that answer. What do you think the people and the sports fans of North Carolina want to know about? Both, either, one or the other?
No fluff. Just give it to us.
Well, I think the starting point, Mike, is that after 30 years of what a lot of people would appreciate in their own way, the grind, I found a much better balance between work and life, my personal life and my professional life over these last 2+ years. So, on the personal side, a quick symbolic story for you. I have lived in the same house in North Carolina for about 24 years. But if you live in a tunnel, as I did, and you have tunnel vision, as I did, because I was an attorney for 17 years, I was a business owner with the ACC Sports Journal and ACCSports.com for a long time, employing a lot of people and having all the stresses that come with small family-owned businesses. The street that I live on for 24 years, you've been there, it has 2 cul-de-sacs. Now, I am smart enough to know the name of my own street. But the other street sign, which you can see from my front porch and which I have passed literally thousands of times over the last 24 years, is the name of the other cul-de-sac. Even though I've walked past it, driven past it, walked my dog Oliver past it countless times, I was in such a grind for 24 years. My wife, the lovely and talented Maria, asked me, "Do you know the name of that street? You can see it when you're sitting on our porch. We drive past it almost every day." I didn't know the name of it. And that symbolized the 20+ years where I was just neck deep into some combination of being a business owner, an attorney, a radio host, a writer, an editor, and a lot of other things to a lot of other people. And I'll tell you another quick pandemic story that also showcases my kind of tunnel vision for so long. You mentioned music, Mike. There's a band performer right now named Michael Franti. I'm actually headed to the coast in our great state, Wilmington, later this month to see him appear in another concert down there. I did not know that Michael Franti existed as of my radio show, statewide and syndicated, ending in the year 2020. Didn't know he existed. I might have heard his song, but if I did, I didn't even know it was his song. And this is a guy who's pretty well accomplished for decades. During the pandemic, I not only got to listen to his stuff for the first time, I would tell you, as a lover of music since I was a little boy, he's probably one of my 5 favorite artists of all time. What kind of a tunnel do you have to be living in for 50 years of life to not even know that someone who turns out to be among your favorite performers even existed? Those are just a couple of trivial examples, but I think they symbolize how for 20 to 30 years, and I'm glad I did it that way. I don't want to take anything back. I did the best I could in my personal relationships while obviously tackling a lot of things in my professional world. But in these last 2+ years, more quality time with my wife, more quality time with my son, Anthony. I was able to visit him as he was graduating from ECU and enjoying the Greenville part of our great state a lot. My daughter is at App State. I've had a lot of trips to Boone. She's a singer out there. She's a rising senior with the Mountaineers. I've seen close friends like Darren Vaught and Hayes Permar and Jared Brooks, my back-to-back-to-back producers of the statewide David Glenn Show, collectively probably for 15 years or so. I played golf with those guys and other close friends. Darren and I must have played golf 50 times in the first year after our show ended because that was one of the few sports that you were allowed to play outdoors during the worst of the pandemic. I meet these guys, in other contexts, taking them out to dinner, taking them to concerts or sporting events, along with other friends. And Mike, I've played golf in probably 11 or 12 states. I've been able to travel internationally. The family and I just got back from Italy, a 2-week trip over there earlier this month. I get to go to the gym all the time. I'm not in the greatest shape as an older guy, but, I was 6 foot 185 in college. I'm 6 foot 185 in my 50s. So that's not bad. I've been able to watch more Netflix and other movies, series, and documentaries with my wife than I probably did in the previous 20 years combined. Mike, almost everybody has a music playlist. I was in my mid-50s and had never made a playlist. That's how tunnel vision I was. Right now, if you saw my phone, you'd see probably 30 playlists, not only Jimmy Buffett and AC/DC and Michael Franti and a whole bunch of others, but there's a DG Island music playlist. There's a DG all-time favorite playlist.
We're going to have to share this. We're going to have to make
if I'm allowed to share it, I will share it. Trust me. Just reading books, supporting friends, man, whether somebody's getting married. In my old days, I might not have gone to their wedding. In the last few years, of course, I say yes. I have younger former interns and former employees having children for the first time. And on the sad side, one of my best friends lost his dad. Back in my crazy days, I probably would have flown in and flown out on the same day if I made it there at all. And this is a guy whose dad, drove me to Little League practice back when I was 11 years old. Instead, I was able to not only go there, spend a week with my friend as he's mourning the loss of his dad. Another guy in our age bracket lost his wife to ALS. I mean, what a horrible thing, especially at such a young age. Instead of just sending him a condolence card, I was able to be with him for a while, along with some old college friends that helped him through, what was one of the most traumatic times of his life. And on the professional side, man, we don't have enough time to get into it all, but I've become a sports media professor at UNC Wilmington, and it has been one of the great joys of my life. I've been able to just kind of expand my horizons and do some things in various areas of expertise that I didn't always have a lot of time to visit in the past. And in the teaching enterprise, that's a brand new thing for me. My mom was a teacher, and I certainly know sports media, but I didn't know that I would be a good teacher. At UNC Wilmington, the seniors voted me one of the highest honors that university gives to a professor. They call it a Make a Difference Award. And adjuncts rarely win that award. But my seniors, and I only have 20 students per class, they voted me into that honor. I wrote for The Athletic, which I think is some of the best 21st century journalism. They have tried to hire me full-time several times. I'm not interested in moving out of our great state. So, and at one point they stopped using freelancers. So my relationship with them, basically an international website with more than 1 million paying subscribers, which is about as good as it gets in the history of sports media. That relationship has been on pause. But WCHL, 97.9 The Hill, chapelboro.com, where my columns have appeared for a few years. I have coached other sports radio hosts on the art of the interview, hired by their program directors or the companies that own those stations. I helped a radio company in Virginia buy a magazine and a website. I helped somebody who wanted to syndicate their radio show regionally, the way we did here in North Carolina for many years, in other parts of the country. I do speaking engagements. I've done work for a company here in North Carolina. It was born here called Fuely. I was one of their original investors with the lovely and talented Maria years ago. So I was able to help them in a way that I had not been able to previously. I'm doing some work for a company called Brief Catch that seeks out, believe it or not, people with legal backgrounds and journalism backgrounds. So I was kind of a perfect fit for them, and I enjoy working for that company. And there's a much longer list. There's a group called Lawyers Defending American Democracy. I take my Americanism seriously here after July 4th and otherwise. So I was able to join a wonderful nonpartisan organization that consists entirely of lawyers who are calling out some of the crazy things going on in our country, including the legal system right now. I even looked into getting into politics myself, Mike, but I'm going to leave that on the back burner as you and I and others dive into the North Carolina Sports Network. And I hope to bring in a law firm here in North Carolina as part of our enterprise, because I loved being an attorney for 17 years. And there's something left in that world for me, just as you and I are bringing back the David Glenn Show in a different form. And I'm going to elevate, my role here in sports media to a different level than it has been over these last 3 years. Funny thing is, I've been on the radio every day, even since 2020, I should say. Now, I wasn't on the station that people were used to hearing me for 20 years, but I'm on other shows almost every day. And I'm going to continue to do that. Podcasts, TV stations, sports radio shows, terrestrial radio, satellite radio, straight to consumer stuff like we're doing now. I haven't really left the industry, but thanks to what you and the North Carolina Sports Network are doing, I'm diving back in a much bigger way than I have since 2020.
So that's where you've been for the last 3 years. But why now? Why come back right now? I mean, you are an award-winning sports writer, a two-time NMSA North Carolina Sportscaster of the Year. If I'm not mistaken, you'd have to check with Dave Gorin on this. I don't know if there's ever been a sports talk show host that has won that award once, maybe even twice. I mean, that's an incredible honor. And you are still, it's one of the reasons why we're doing this, why I reached out to you to begin with. You're very good. And I missed hearing very good, thoughtful, challenging sports talk, not just taking stuff at, the base level and going with it, but really going that extra mile, going a little bit deeper. Why now, David? Why come back to your audience here in 2023?
Yeah, I thank Dave Gorin and the folks at the NMSA because you're right, Mike. That award has been around since the 1950s. And we were the first from the sports talk genre ever to be honored as the North Carolina Sportscaster of the Year. And the idea that we've now done it multiple times, they told me that guys like Woody Durham and Wally Alsley back in the day, and more recent legends like Mick Mixon, Bob Harris, these are some of the legendary broadcasters in the history of our state. To be on that list as a multi-time winner is an incredibly humbling experience because I've been named this or that by a newspaper or a website dozens of times in my career. That Sportscaster of the Year honor comes from a vote of your colleagues. And those are the folks who are in the trenches, understand the challenges of what we do. So as much as I appreciate when the fans vote me this or that, or the listeners or readers vote us this or that, that's among the most incredible honors I've ever received. To answer your question, there is a personal part of it and an editorial part of it as to why I'm jumping in with the North Carolina Sports Network, why I'm jumping in even with you personally and the others that we're going to ride this wave into the future with us. Number one, my family and I love the state of North Carolina. I was born in Illinois on an Air Force base. I was raised in the city of Philadelphia and the southeastern Pennsylvania area, growing up going to the Jersey Shore. I left for college in Miami, so I know the whole East Coast really, really well. And I've traveled the country. So I haven't been to all 50 states, but I've probably been to 30 plus. And we just love it here. I mean, how many states have great beaches and great mountains and great lakes and great golf courses and
a great economy?
And a great economy and reasonable taxes and reasonable traffic. And we could go on and on. I'm here to tell you, it's a short list of states that have all of those things. And we're leaving some stuff out, of course. But, as I mentioned, we sent Anthony to ECU and love Greenville. We sent Avery to Boone and love App State and the mountains. We have vacationed in Asheville. I teach at UNC Wilmington. I've been to Panthers games and Hornets games and Charlotte FC soccer matches in the great city of Charlotte, which is soon to call the Atlantic Coast Conference home, with that headquarters moving from Greensboro, where it's been for 70 years, and where I've been to many events and concerts and where we have many friends. The ACC headquarters on its way to Charlotte a little bit later this summer. So there is that personal part. Mike, I've been offered full-time teaching positions in other states. I've been offered full-time sports media positions in other states. And the main reason I didn't take them usually was I just don't want to leave North Carolina. As much as I described loving theathletic.com, and I truly do, I have intense admiration and respect for how they do things. The positions that I was most qualified for were based in New York and San Francisco. And even in a remote type working world, these were high profile positions where I would have had to truly move to a brand new part of the country. And I just wasn't interested in doing that. So that's the personal part. The editorial part, it involves you, to be candid, and some of our other partners. I have been blessed mostly with incredible business partners over the years. But as I get older, especially, I'm only working with people that I like, respect, and admire. And I don't think the collisions in my career with a CEO or with a radio company owner or a radio affiliate who may not like something I said on his or her affiliate across the state of North Carolina. Remember, we were heard in more than 300 North Carolina cities and towns. So occasionally there's going to be a listener upset, a reader upset, an affiliate owner upset, a syndicator upset, or whatever. Those conversations did not happen nearly as often as the conspiracy theorists thought that they did. But I'm an educated guy. I'm not shy about my opinions. I do try to save my strongest opinions for the things that I know the most about and where I have the most expertise to share. And frankly, I think all people should do more of that and speak less aggressively on topics where they know little or nothing. We've become a country in some ways of what I call aggressive ignorance, where there have always been ignorant people. We've just somehow evolved to a point where people are more confident in things they're ignorant about and more aggressive about it. I'm not a big fan of that approach. But why do I bring that up? In the modern media world, when push comes to shove, you need your business partners to have your back. And I need my business partners to share my values. You do, the North Carolina Sports Network does. I, of course, control the content of the David Glenn Show, so there's no problems there. I've been fortunate in my career that I have mostly had business partners rather than true bosses, quote unquote. So I haven't really had to answer to too many people, and I've had an incredible amount of autonomy and independence. But that's part of the editorial aspect to why I'm excited and energized about our new enterprise. It's you. It's our blank canvas where we can take this as many directions as we want, right? It's not only sports, which is our launching pad. We all know that. But it is culture. It is society. It can be music. It can be movies, sports movies and otherwise. It can be travel. Me sharing my family's travels to Italy and France and Switzerland and England and the Caribbean and other places, and sharing what we liked and what we didn't like as much, and listening to the people of North Carolina who might like music or might like travel in addition to the sports that most of our audience would have in common. You and I also are going to make a charity a part of this element, probably multiple charities. We're not ready to announce that yet, but at this stage of my life and career, I have plenty of money saved for retirement. I don't need to make the big bucks that I made for 25 years or so. And I want to contribute and give back to some of the same charities I've worked with in the past. We'll see how many of them hook up with us, but Make-A-Wish Foundation, Special Olympics, the V Foundation, Folds of Honor. Man, I've rappelled down the side of tall buildings, literally, to raise money for charity. And so not all the stuff is that dramatic, but I want to build on the charity theme that has been a part of my career for a long time, and I even want to ramp it up. We're going to have a video element with, of course, our YouTube channel that you're going to tell folks more about, and I will as well over the weeks to come. But we've all in radio heard you have a face for radio. Ha ha. I don't take it personally, but there is something fun about a video element where, if needed, I can share my screen. I can pull out a whiteboard to diagram, whatever I might.
That's modern day Tim Russert for sports.
You got it, in the sports world these days. Of course, there's an audio element, and we even have some archival audio where, to be candid, I have had more high quality one-on-one interviews with, United States presidents, North Carolina governors, actors and actresses, musicians, incredibly famous people within the sports world, but also beyond the sports world. And we have some best of where, heck, I talked to Barack Obama one-on-one. I talked to George W. Bush one-on-one. Right. I talked to Stephen King and John Grisham, two of the greatest authors literally in the history of the world, one-on-one. And of course, we talked about sports with all of those people who are beyond the sports world, but share our passion for sports. Not only do we have the audio element with this new and different version of the David Glenn Show podcast style, but we have the archives as well. And as somebody who's had one-on-ones with Mike Tyson and Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Martina Navratilova and Michael Jordan back in the day, and virtually almost anybody that I wanted to interview over 20 plus years, we eventually did. So we'll have some fun with the archives. I'm a journalism school grad, and whereas many people know me as a radio guy, or some even remember me from their local TV channel, I'm a writer at heart. So our new website is going to have a lot of my articles, and that's to my core part of who I am as a person and part of who I am as a sports media member. And I love the statewide aspect. I've turned down a lot of jobs that would be only in one part of North Carolina or another. I'm just not interested in that. I've kind of been there, done that. I'm not interested in leaving North Carolina. I like the fact that you and I and others are going to travel the state of North Carolina.
Oh, yeah.
It wasn't just words that I mentioned about we love it from the mountains to the beaches and through the lakes and the golf courses and so many places in between. Those aren't just words. We're going to live those words. And as I did with another version of what I now call a traveling circus, we're going to get to see and meet and enjoy the people who watch our YouTube channel and subscribe to it and listen to my podcast and visit our website and enjoy, our visits together, you and I, Mike. So you put all that together personally and professionally. This was the right fit for me at the right time of my life. And just as I've tried to thank so many others, I thank you now for helping make this magic happen. And I thank anybody who's listening or watching us right now, because without you, again, this is going to be a success. It's just a matter of degree. But for it to be the success that we intend it to be, we need all hands on deck. And that, again, could be you reading our articles, your eyeballs, subscribe. It's free to our YouTube channel when Mike calls for that action. And some of you out there have mentioned you want to partner with us with your business. And as we all know, we live in a world where you better have the economics behind you, because as ESPN's recent layoffs and 1,000 other examples have shown, you can be really, 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 really good and still shown the door. That's just the way the world works. And sports media is no exception to that.
David, one of the things that we've talked about making one of our fundamental tenets here on the North Carolina Sports Network is just cutting right to the chase. So let's just cut right to the chase, because there are a lot of DG fanatics out there that still want that extra bit of fact. They want to hear it directly from you. And I know when I was listening to your show, whenever I was working in Chicago or New York or DC, Baltimore, University of Arkansas, and then even into Dallas, I could always count on your candor. So let's go back now. You were on so many stations, multiple states, winning awards. This David Glenn show was a juggernaut. I mean, it was really connecting with the audience. And then all of a sudden, boom, in the blink of an eye, I couldn't believe how quickly it just all ended. And I know that was a real tough thing to navigate for you, but how does that happen? I mean, you used to joke all the time about coaches and buyouts and getting fired, but still getting paid not to coach, or in this case, getting paid not to broadcast. But did you ever think that could happen to you as a broadcaster?
I knew it could happen, Mike, and I'll try to be as blunt and candid as I can about this, because I haven't been asked frequently about it. I've had to be careful with my answers to those questions. But let's start with the obvious. There was a worldwide pandemic, one of the worst to hit humans in the last 100 years. My show ended in March of 2020. So as the entire world was shutting down, it is not mere coincidence that my last show happened in the midst of all that. So anybody whose theory is independent of a worldwide pandemic, I'm just going to leave you off to the side with the QAnon lunatics and the other conspiracy theorists. It was really between me and my business partner. So there are literally 2 people on planet Earth who know everything that happened. And I am one of those 2. So folks can have whatever theory they want to have. There was no scandal. There was no illness. I'm a very healthy guy for over 50. It coincided with a worldwide pandemic. Another part that's just maybe stating the obvious, but I don't know if a lot of sports radio listeners realize this. I teach about this in my UNC Wilmington sports media classes. Just as newspapers declined and their influence declined in the 1990s and the early 2000s, of course, after the explosion of the internet, terrestrial radio has been in decline for basically a decade. And I really think that most people can just use their common sense. I'll try to make a long story short. But AM, FM radio, by the way, audio is still incredibly popular. It is not a decline in the interest in audio. But if you imagine the audio pie, Mike, when you and I were younger, if you and I were doing this 20 years ago, our goal, number one, it wouldn't have been podcast style, right? It wouldn't have been YouTube channel style 20 years ago. But let's say this was on the radio. The competition really was us trying to be more interesting, more informative, more entertaining, or some combination of the things that people like than the country music station and the rock music station and the political talk station and the news talk station and your other options on the AM, FM dial. And of course, people did listen to records and then CDs and 8 tracks back in the day, right? So there were always other audio options. But at the same time, a worldwide pandemic is descending upon us. The AM/FM radio model is in decline. And my business partner and I had very candid conversations about this. And I respect and admire that because I'm a businessman. I've signed more checks in my life than I have cashed while working for somebody else, right? So if somebody comes to me and says, hey, you're the highest paid guy on sports radio in the Mid-Atlantic, which I was. I had an advisor do that research, and that was the salary that I demanded around 2008 or 2009. I got that salary, but that means two things. You're the first head on the chopping block if things go wrong, when you make more than everybody else, and you're even making more than all the vice presidents in the company, and some of them don't like that. But also, the expectations are higher because you're being paid an unprecedented amount of money, at least in this part of the country, an unprecedented amount of money. So as the audio pie gets more complicated, instead of going bankrupt, which SiriusXM almost did about 13 or 14 years ago, they not only survived, they now have 30 million, 40 million or more subscribers, and a lot of brand new vehicles are made with SiriusXM. So that's another bite of the audio pie. I ask my students at UNC Wilmington, if you're in an audio kind of mood and you get into your car, what do you usually do? About 1 or 2 out of 20 raise their hand and say, AM, FM radio, the David Glenn show back in the day, or my favorite DJ or whatever. More of them, much, much more of them, say either they Bluetooth their favorite playlist from their iPhone into their dashboard while they're driving, or they listen to satellite radio, or they listen to on-demand podcasts. So you still have, an enormous, overwhelming majority of Americans who love audio as a part of their life. But the pie slices keep getting smaller and smaller. And AM/FM radio, of course, as one of the trailblazers and trendsetters in the audio world, they got hit harder than most. So it was really a combination of factors, Mike. I had conversations, and my most astute listeners, man, they not only remember things like I call my wife the lovely and talented Maria, or they remember where I grew up, or, that I played in the early rounds of the Little League World Series, or I went to college in Miami, or I'm a law school graduate and practiced law for a long time. They not only remember stuff like that. I had said a handful of times on the air, I don't want to be an AM/FM radio host, even with this unprecedented statewide platform, when I'm 55 years old. Well, guess what? I collected my last check. I think I was 53 years old. So all this combination of events did was change my timetable by a year or two. Darren Vaught and I had talked about what was next for us. We saw the decline of AM/FM radio. Why are so many other favorite sports radio hosts being let go and hired by younger, cheaper people? Well, because the economic model has shrunk. There were no sporting events for a while back in 2020, remember? So there was less to talk about. And when our show was canceled, the ratings absolutely tanked, not just because we were popular, but because the other hosts had no games to talk about for a while, which would be hard for any host, including us. So, one of our fun things with the David Glenn show for 7 or 8 years was the Big Tailgate Tour, which is a very interactive thing, face-to-face, meeting your listeners. And we had to cancel that, or at least it was only March. But we had to kind of prospectively cancel it. And our sponsors had told us that they preliminarily had to bail on what was an incredibly profitable event that was a huge part of our revenue streams. So there goes another revenue stream as the AM/FM radio economic model is declining. You add it all up, and it just made it ripe for the expensive guy to be let go. And when it comes to, I think besides all the ridiculous conspiracies, I was asked, and of course, some people just volunteer things because they think they know it all. I was asked if, my willingness to share my expertise as an attorney, as somebody who has studied racial matters, legal matters, social matters, gender matters, LGBT issues, misogyny type issues. Now, as a sports radio host with unusual training, right? Less than 1% of sports radio hosts have my background in the law or my background in terms of education. So, of course, when social issues collided with the sports world, did I talk about it? Of course I did. Did I sometimes get people upset? Of course I did. Now, keep in mind, there are 100 other reasons unrelated to social issues that I would also upset listeners. Our general rule of thumb was 90% of people liked our style, and the 10% could be divided into several groups. Some just didn't like our style. I take no offense to that. It's kind of like if you offer 10 different flavors at your ice cream parlor, if I'm vanilla and you like strawberry better, I'm not offended. I don't take it personally, right? So some people, we just weren't their style. That's cool. Some of the greatest actors, actresses, directors, musicians in the world, there's a whole bunch of people out there that they're just not their cup of tea. To each his own, to each her own. That's no big deal. But there was a small segment of people who just didn't like being told that they were ignorant about some topics, that they were being racist or bigoted in ways that they didn't realize. You know me well enough to know I'll never apologize for that. I have had conversations with CEOs, presidents, vice presidents, like billionaires, the people who own the companies that are somehow affiliated with my enterprises. I always tell them the same thing. If I'm being inaccurate, I will apologize. If I'm being unfair, we will debate why you or a listener thinks I'm being unfair. But just telling me I'm not allowed to talk about something, it just doesn't work that way. And I know most employees are not in a position to speak that boldly to the deep-pocketed people. I've been doing it since I was 19 years old. It's part of who I am. I've always owned my own companies, so it gives me a little leverage to have those difficult conversations in bold ways. I've never had more than 2/3 of my income from the same company. So I've many times in 20 years, I have said, if you don't like me telling the truth about an important topic in the sports world, fire me. I've said that probably 20 times. But to answer those who think that's what happened in March of 2020, number one, if you ignore all the other things that I just discussed, you're completely clueless and your theory is completely ignorant. But number two, I think those conspiracy theorists are surprised to hear this. I probably had one difficult conversation with a sponsor in 12 years of our statewide show. One. I probably had one difficult conversation with the syndicator of the show in 12 years. I probably had one or two difficult conversations with vice presidents over 12 years. I probably had one or two conversations with an affiliate owner over 12 years. So the theory, and they didn't all happen in 2020. I mean, there was the Colin Kaepernick stuff. There was the HB2 stuff. I stayed in my position through an awful lot of emotional lightning rod, social, political topics that bled into the sports world. And I obviously wasn't let go in 2008 or 2012 or 2015 or 2018. So I roll my eyes when people claim to have knowledge of things that in some cases, literally only two people on the planet have the answers to. Again, me being one of those two, my business partner being the other. It was a combination of events that led to that most successful, biggest platform sports radio show in the history of the Mid-Atlantic. That's what it was for 12 years, roughly. That combination of things is what made it go away. Were there people who wanted to let me go prior to that? Of course there were. But that's been the case literally since the late 1980s, when I was upsetting people with stuff that I wrote or said about the ACC or the Duke-Carolina rivalry or whatever other social topic was going on back 30, 35 years ago.
I tell you, it's been a journey since you and I met in the bottom floor of the old Vilcom Village Companies Plaza little headquarters out on Weaver Dairy Road when you were working on the writing side, the journalistic side of the house, and I was over on the broadcast side with Woody and Nick. But we all came up under the Kings Mountain, North Carolina legend, the one, the only Jim Hebner. And he was always really, really good about focusing in on what you needed to focus in on and milking everything out of the broadcasters and the journalists and his staff to tell that story correctly. So now, David, you're going from the world of 3 hours a day, 5 days a week, plus something on the weekend with the tailgate tour. You're on the air or out and about 18 hours a week to now. It's now one podcast a week here in July. The plan is to expand to go to twice a week in August, and then startup also in August. We'll have more on this next week, and we talk more about our foundational partner, NC Pork, and then also about our plans for Saturdays in the fall in North Carolina. But your concentration is going down. We're going to have less DG, but more concentration. So what are you itching to talk about? What are you really looking forward to exploring with your audience, and maybe shining a different light on something that other people are talking about, but giving it that special DG touch?
Yeah, it's a combination of things that we've found success with in the past, and then enjoying and celebrating our completely blank canvas here at the North Carolina Sports Network. So, for example, everybody knows we would get these market research forms back, Mike, and you would have laughed if you saw them. Because even the people, if 90% people said nice things about us, even the 10% would say things like, DG gets really awesome guests, right? Or DG really knows how to interview a guest. So, of course, I'd be crazy, we'd be crazy, if I did not build on a career where I had countless one-on-one interviews, not only with those political and entertainment figures that I mentioned earlier, but the Dean Smiths, Mike Krzyzewski's, Roy Williams of the world, Dale Earnhardt Jr. and other NASCAR stars, Gary Player and other golf stars, countless NBA and college basketball coaches and former players and players. Of course, the most interesting people from North Carolina, starting with the sports world, but also, as I mentioned, with, Roy Cooper or Barack Obama or George W. Bush or somebody else, Pat McCrory, from both sides of the aisle, when they had interesting observations to make about the sports world. Obama being a huge Dean Smith fan, he joined us when Dean Smith died. Why join anybody else, right? We had the biggest platform in the history of our state when it comes to syndicated radio. So we want to build on those traditions. We want to build on the fact that a lot of people in a world filled with collective bargaining agreements and name, image, likeness, which is relatively new to the college scene, and conference realignment and financial issues, college and pro being more important than ever. That's my wheelhouse. There are things that others, I've always said there's a much longer list of things that I do not do well than the list of things that I do well. But I'm never going to say no. If you ask me, do you think you're one of the best in the United States of America on those topics? My answer is not only yes, my answer is hell yes, unapologetically. In certain areas, my expertise, just like my guest list and my ability to interview, that is where we have won awards. That is where independent people repeatedly have told us, please give us more of that. We have the NFL and the Panthers in this state. We have the NHL and the surging Carolina Hurricanes in this state. We have the NBA and the mostly uninteresting for now Charlotte Hornets in our state. We have the NCAA coming out our ears with the ACC, but also, of course, Duke, Carolina State, Wake, but also ECU with a great tradition in football and otherwise. App State with a great tradition in football and otherwise. ECU baseball, among other college programs, NC Central, North Carolina A&T, UNC Wilmington, where I teach, UNC Asheville, UNC Greensboro, and I'm, Campbell. I'm leaving some out. You know them as well as I do, given your many years in college sports. We have a unique landscape here where if I were hosting a show in my hometown of Philadelphia, my original hometown, I would be told I have to talk 95% about professional sports. If you and I were hosting the show in Alabama, we would be told we have to talk 90% about college sports. In our current positions, number one, nobody's telling us anything. We answer all of those questions, right? But even as we have the autonomy and authority to answer those questions, the obvious answer is we're the best blend or as good a blend of college and pro as the United States has to offer in a single state. And it's not just college and pro in the ways that I mentioned. It is NASCAR. It is golf. It is tennis. It is countless other things. We don't have Major League Baseball. That's the one top-level league that we don't have yet. Wouldn't we like to be a part of bringing MLB to the state of North Carolina? And I don't put that beyond our reach over the next decade. We'll see what happens there. But we do have two of the most famous and most accomplished minor league baseball teams in the entire country in the Durham Bulls and the Charlotte Knights. I mean, those stadiums are amazing. Those traditions are amazing. I want to celebrate the people, the places, and the sports of North Carolina. You can do that with interviews. You can do that with storytelling, verbally, video-wise, but also I love to write. Others do good things along those lines. We're not the only ones. But as people continue to see a dramatic watering down of the caliber of their media because of these declining economic models in newspapers and sports radio and terrestrial radio more generally, but even most people don't realize most podcasts don't make any money. I was invited to do a podcast 25 times over the last 2 years. I was not interested in any of those because there was not an economic model built around them the way we are building that includes a traveling sports circus and speaking engagements and stuff you can buy, T-shirts and sweatshirts on our website and a YouTube channel and all sorts of partners in pretty much not only the charitable area, but so many industries, some of which our state is famous for. So there's a longer answer to that, believe it or not, but I know we have only so much time. I'll leave it there. We were always described as unique, whether it was with the ACC Sports Journal and how we turned that into the best-selling college sports magazine in the history of our country. That's what we built that into before I sold it back in 2015. And I'm really, really proud of that. We had an unprecedented syndicated sports radio platform in the mid-Atlantic United States. I'm really, really proud of that. You have to do a lot of things well, and you have to be unique in at least some ways, offer unusual expertise, which I think we have that unusual and impressive guest list, which I know we've always had and will continue to have. I'm excited about sharing what makes this state great and telling some stories that are often told, but trying to tell them even better. And finding and shedding light upon even more stories that either don't see the light of day or might only see the light of day in a very small universe. And with our statewide platform and multiple platforms on that statewide basis, I think we can bring the best small stories that have small audiences to much bigger audiences and make them much bigger and better stories.
And really, that's when you talk about North Carolina sports, and I'm going to just focus in on what you talked about a second ago, just North Carolina college sports. It's not always the North Carolinas, the NC States, the Dukes, the Wake Forest that have the best stories. I mean, I can go from my hometown in Newton Conover, and just out of the way, there is Lenoir-Rhyne, now University in Hickory, and their reformation has been off the charts. First with Neil McGahee, the late promoter of pretty much everything in North Carolina for a 40-year period. And then he got the ball rolling there. And now Kim Pate, their new athletics director, has really driven that to new levels of achievement, winning the D2 lacrosse championship for men's lacrosse this past spring. I mean, that's a big deal. I mean, not a lot of people in Hickory, North Carolina know about lacrosse, or at least 10 years ago, and now they're a national champion. When you look at what Dick Christie is doing at UNC Pembroke and how the Braves program has shot up, and then High Point University, you mentioned Darren Vaught, an old DG producer, now the voice of High Point basketball, and everything that is going on at that campus. It truly is a state, North Carolina, the Old North State, that is chock full of great stories, and we look forward to telling them right here on the North Carolina Sports Network. So we're in the last 10 minutes right here with the first piece of content on NCSN, and I want to go through a little 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 with you, Dave. So right, let's go to a quick topic countdown.
I'm going to try to get better at short answers, Mike, I promise.
This is going to be great. We're going to get your 30 seconds or less as a tease to what will be coming up from David Glenn on NCSN, the North Carolina Sports Network, over the next few months, and maybe even just the next 2 months, because these are some pretty timely, pretty much timeless conversation points that everybody will have an opinion on. And we want to hear our audience comment right there on our YouTube channel, and also hit us up on the NC Sportsnet on Twitter and other platforms as we continue to grow and build this out. So let's go with our number 5 question right here, David. What is the top sports brand in North Carolina today, and why?
Well, the top sports brand in terms of leagues is the NFL, but since the Panthers have never won a Super Bowl, or in the NBA, another popular sports brand, the Hornets have rarely been relevant. I'm going to go to the college sports ranks, which have become semi-pro, and say that the University of North Carolina, which over the last 50 years has had all those men's basketball national championships, Michael Jordan, Julius Peppers, Mia Hamm, and countless other brilliant female athletes. They finish in the top 10 all sports standings almost every year, from Dean Smith to Roy Williams and now Hubert Davis and other success in between. The Nike swoosh has been a part of that brand for a long time. Michael Jordan, as long as he's around and alive, and even after that, will be a big part of that famous brand. There are others here at the college level, including, of course, Duke basketball. But I think the top sports brand has to start with the Tar Heels.
All right. So you heard it right there. First thing on NCSN, David Glenn says the North Carolina Tar Heels are the #1 sports brand in the Old North State. Let us know what you think. Question number 4. Will the Atlantic Coast Conference, as you said, founded at Sedgefield there in Greensboro, now moving down to the Queen City in Charlotte under brand new commissioner, still relatively new commissioner, Jim Phillips, will the Atlantic Coast Conference be a viable entity in 5 years?
If you want to feel old real quick, Mike, I have covered the ACC for almost 35 years, and it is 70 years old. That means I've literally covered it for half of its existence, which makes me feel old. But the answer is yes, the ACC will be viable, whereas there is no doubt, and I've written and talked about this a lot as a guest and otherwise, there's no doubt that the ACC is in its most vulnerable financial position ever, because it has fallen so far behind the Big Ten and the Southeastern Conference financially in terms of the check each school gets from the shared conference revenue pool at the conference office. That's a massive alarm bell. What people forget is that the Pac-12 and the Big 12 in different ways have even more to be concerned about than the ACC does. So will the ACC catch those other two big leagues anytime soon? No. But will the ACC fall apart? I don't think so. That grant of rights is likely to keep it intact, I think, for the rest of this decade.
Number 3, has the departure of Coach Krzyzewski and Roy Williams from coaching on Tobacco Road lessened the intensity of the Battle of the Blues? I mean, the last time you were on the air, both of these legends were still on the sidelines, and now you have Jon Scheyer and Hubert Davis walking the sidelines in Durham and Chapel Hill, respectively. Is the rivalry what it was when the legends were there as much as it is now with these former players taking the reins?
Yeah, the blunt answer, as much as I love this rivalry and have been a part of it for 35 years, the blunt answer is it's not the same. Mike, the reason, and you know this as a former athletic director, the reason that Duke Carolina was not only the most watched college basketball game in many regular seasons prior to the NCAA tournament. Some years, it was #1 and #2, meaning the Heels and the Devils played in Durham and the Heels and the Devils got it together again in Chapel Hill. The top 2 most watched games prior to the NCAA tournament, meaning including conference tournament weekend, was often Blue Devils Tar Heels 1, Blue Devils Tar Heels 2. That only happens when you have legendary coaches and future NBA lottery picks and really pretty records on both sides. Lately, yeah, we did have Duke and Carolina both in the Final Four just a couple years ago, but Coach K was a part of that. And we've also had some weird years where either Duke or Carolina didn't even make the NCAA tournament in relatively recent times. So it's still a great rivalry, don't get me wrong. One of the best, I believe, in the world of sports, not an exaggeration. Yankees, Red Sox, and a whole bunch of others, but Duke, Carolina, and men's basketball is on that short list. But it can't possibly be considered of the same caliber when it's a regular season matchup between Jon Scheyer and Hubert Davis, at least not until those guys put a little meat on the bones or skeletons of their resumes.
Might be a little bit more exciting if it was Matt Doherty and Chris Collins over there.
Yes, we might need a WWE ref for the halftime portion of that game.
Earl Hebner, come on in. We'll get it going right now. Now, you get a little bit more time for this one because this is one that I'm hot on right now because we are just a few weeks away from preseason camp starting on college campuses, high school football getting rolling here in North Carolina here in a few weeks in the summer of 23. But there are a lot of great college football coaches in North Carolina right now. And it'd be hard for me to say these are the top ones or this is the top guy. But if I'm going to put you on the spot, and I am, who do you think the number one college football coach is right now in North Carolina? And the one caveat, Dave, it doesn't have to be Division One. You can go Division One, Division Two, or Division Three. So have at it.
Yeah, I'll give you. I'm going to drive you crazy with this, Mike, but I use the phrase body of work a lot. And my legal background always wants the questioner to be real specific with their question, because best coach could mean body of work, or it could mean who would you pick right now to win a single football game, right?
Let's go
robots against robots, who would you take? So I'm going to go body of work, and we can postpone my other answers for another time. But in terms of body of work, in whatever order you want to put them, I'm going to take three guys who are at the FBS level: Mack Brown, Dave Clawson, and Mike Houston. Mack Brown is the only FBS level national champion that our state has to speak of. He did it at Texas, of course, but during his first tenure at UNC, he also produced back-to-back top 10 teams, back-to-back top 10 in the national polls at the end of the season. The number of times any school has done that at the FBS level in the history of our state is really small. And Mack Brown did it back-to-back, and obviously he's had some really interesting teams that kind of topped out at 9 wins here recently. But I think his body of work, including that national title with the Longhorns, puts him in that upper echelon. Dave Clawson won at Fordham, won at Richmond, won at Bowling Green, and now has been to 7 straight bowl games and an ACC championship game at Wake Forest, which has not won consistently in football very often in their history. So Dave
Have to go back to P-Head Walker. You got to go back to P-Head.
Yes, shout out to P-Head Walker. And then Mike Houston, that's a guy, you mentioned smaller colleges. He took Lenoir-Rhyne right here in our backyard to the Division II national championship game. Then he was hired at the Citadel in South Carolina, which is a hard place to win in football because of their academic standards and military setting. He had great success there for a couple of years. He's hired at the FCS level by James Madison and wins a national championship with the Dukes. And then he inherited what I thought was a train wreck at ECU. And after a couple of building years, he has taken the Pirates to back-to-back bowl games. Dave Clawson and Mike Houston, I think, in mostly difficult jobs, not all of them, but almost all of them, have been nothing but successful, and that's over an extended period. So they're on there. And again, Mack Brown has just taken teams at Texas and Carolina into the rarefied air that few teams in the history of our state have ever experienced, at least at the FBS level in football.
I tell you, one guy that I really am impressed with as well, he's not going to be on everybody's radar screen. He probably should be, and he'll get a big job in the years to come, is Trey Lamb at Gardner-Webb. This guy has come in, and the young guy, I mean, this is one of the youngest coaches in Division I. Now, he's at the FCS level, but this guy is just getting it done. Winning on the field, exciting to watch. Watch the running Bulldogs. They are a athletics department that is really pointed in the right direction and has an opportunity to truly do some special things. In Bowie's Creek, I really like Mike Mentor, the former Carolina Panther, 2-time national champion at Nebraska, where he played for Tom Osborne. But Mike Mentor has a calm about him. And what he's done in the last 2 years of putting together recruiting classes for the Campbell Camels has been truly impressive to watch. And then the other newcomer to the area, but this guy, you talk to other college football coaches around the nation, and I talk to a lot of them. Mike Elko at Duke is a war daddy. He is getting stuff done, and that makes everything relevant right now. I mean, when is the last time that you could look at the Big Four in North Carolina? The Tar Heels, Mack Brown, Dave Doran with the Wolfpack, Dave Clawson at Wake Forest, Mike Elko with the Duke Blue Devils. When's the last time that arguably you could say that the 4 football schools or football programs are better suited than the 4 basketball programs? For Tobacco Road, that's a potential flip right there. I'm not saying it's going to be long term, but right now, that's just the quality of coaching that you have in North Carolina on the college ranks. And one thing that I'm really excited about delving into is even going down a level outside of college and looking at what's being done in the high school ranks in this state. And over the summer, North Carolina high school football legends in Marion Kirby and also David Elder have passed away. And these are guys that meant so much to the development of the game in North Carolina. And one guy that I'd really like to talk to, and he's a true legend, Northern Durham high school coach, has been on the staff at North Carolina off and on under different regimes, but with Kenny Browning. Of course, I'm going to talk about a former Guilford College Quaker. Go Kenny. But Kenny Browning has done so much to grow the game, and he really has a unique perspective. I hope we can have him as a guest here on the North Carolina Sports Network in the weeks and the months to come. So that leaves us down to the final question, David, the final question right here. And that's, what is the one topic or story that you want to tackle with the new Dave Glenn show that you can't wait to get after, something that's really been burning in your Philadelphia belly over the last couple of years, and you're saying, man, that now the time is here to tackle this story?
You know what I'm going to do, Mike? I'm going to turn that into a tease. Instead of answering it right now, I am going to ask people to listen to the David Glenn Show podcast, to subscribe to our YouTube channel. We need subscribers, and get your friends to subscribe as well. And I will answer your astute question periodically, week by week, show by show, for the remainder of this year. Because really, you know, I started the ACC Sports Journal and ACCSports.com back in the 1990s because I thought that there was a form of journalism that didn't have an outlet, that there were stories that weren't being told. And I hired the best people that I could find, photographers, editors, writers, and all the rest. I had a staff of more than 50 people at the peak of that website and magazine. And that's why it became the best-selling college sports magazine in the history of our country. It takes that kind of attention to detail, that kind of surrounding yourself with the right people, and that kind of judgment when it comes to picking the right topics to tackle and how to do it. So I hope to show my answer to that question that you just asked in the coming months and years, rather than giving another long answer today. It's been 3 years since people heard me on my 3-hour-a-day platform, so I gave you a couple of answers that were probably too long, but I was really combining. Mike, I got thousands and thousands of emails, and of course I've done hundreds and hundreds of shows even over these last 3 years where there was some of those questions that you asked. But I just kind of I went fire hose on you, and I decided to answer them all at once, because I'm sure there are some people out there that might not have seen me for the last 3 years, even though I was on, 100 different platforms. It's great to reunite with anybody who hasn't seen us in quite a while. And we just hope they'll stick with us and trust that we're going to continue to do in different ways many of the things that you and I have been accomplished for in the past. And we're open to feedback as well. When you run the company and you have a blank canvas, which we have, we can pivot. We can do more of this, less of that. We can experiment with this, give up on that. That's part of the beauty of our new enterprise. And we really want the people and sports fans of North Carolina, especially. We'll have many viewers and listeners elsewhere, and we want you to subscribe as well. But we are a North Carolina-centric endeavor and enterprise, as the North Carolina Sports Network name might suggest. So thanks again to the North Carolina Port Council. Thanks to you, Mike Waddell, for making this magic happen. I don't know how much more time we have left, but I know I used to be infamous for blowing the clock in terrestrial radio. I'm really glad we don't have a clock in this format, but we probably have to say goodbye soon, I know.
We do, but we'll be back. So next week, we'll drop another piece of content, but that will be David Glenn Show number 1 of this new iteration. Today, just our first content. Not just, but it is our first content here on the North Carolina Sports Network, and it has been a lot of fun. David, before we let you go for today, tell the folks how they can follow you on social media, and if they want to get in touch with you with a little more long form, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Yeah, so I'm still on Twitter at David Glenn Show. So 2 N's in Glenn at David Glenn Show. If you forget all of our new handles at the North Carolina Sports Network or otherwise, you can always remember davidglennshow.com. That has a lot of my biographical information, but most importantly, it also has a link where you can email me directly. Long form, short form suggestions, ideas. You want to be a partner in some way with what Mike and I are doing with others moving forward. I'm wide open at davidglennshow.com on the World Wide Web. And yeah, I'll be getting back to people quickly because you and I are ramping things up here this summer, and then getting even busier come the start of football season, and heck, basketball and hockey not too far after that.
Man, it is a chock full of action state right here in North Carolina. David, you are one of a kind. Thank you for coming on board with the North Carolina Sports Network. We'll see you again next week. That's David Glenn. For our producer, Melvin Quitman Jr., and the rest of our crew, thanks for making the North Carolina Sports Network a part of your weekly podcast lineup. And be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Twitter at the ncsportsnet.com and the ncsportsnet on all the social media platforms. And don't forget to bookmark our new website. Will be up and running next week. That's ncsportsnet.com. From Murphy to Manteo, Roxborough to Southport, from the mountains to the beach, and all of the pork, pickles, and pundits that we can reach. Thank you for tuning in to the North Carolina Sports Network. We'll see you next week.